This is Andy Chambers. Thank you for joining me for today's update. We're going to start by taking a look at the big picture. We'll start with the Dow, and then we'll look at some individual stocks. Well, trading in the Dow on Friday, September 2nd, suggests that the August rally is over and the decline is resuming. A close over the September 1st high of 11,716.84 would put the bearish outlook on hold. The next downside target for the Dow is 10,000. The initial hurdle for the bears is last year's low of 96.14. Friday's big downside gap in the Diamonds Trust Dow ETF paints a more dramatic picture than the price action in the Dow itself. However, the support and resistance points are very similar. The next support for the DIA is seen at 104. The next hurdle for the bears is last year's low of 95.91. The initial hurdle for the bulls is the September 1st high of 117.03. The charts for the S&P 500, the Nasdaq, the mid-cap index, and the small-cap index are all similar to the Dow. For the SPY, the initial hurdle for the bulls is the August 31st high of 123.51. The next support for the SPY is near 110. The next hurdle for the bears is last year's low of 101.13. The bears also have the momentum in the QQQ. The initial hurdle for the bulls is the August 31st high of 55.74. The next support for the QQQ is near 45. The next hurdle for the bears is last year's low of 41.55. The MDY, or S&P Mid-Cap ETF, also gapped down on Friday. The initial hurdle for the bulls is the August 31st high of 161.77. The next support for MDY is near 138. The next hurdle for the bears is the July 2010 low of 125.60. The IWM, or the Russell Small Cap ETF, is the last index that we're going to look at. The IWM appears to be the weakest index right now. The initial hurdle for the bulls is the August 31st high of 73.89. The next hurdle for the bears is the July 2010 low of 58.66. IBM gapped down on Friday. The gap down could be a sign of a lower high top. The initial hurdle for the bulls is the August 31st high of 173.72. The next hurdle for the bears is the March low of 151.71. The next support beyond that is near 140 and 132.50. The gap down on September 2nd could also be a sign of a lower high top for Anadarko Petroleum, or APC. A close over the August 31st high of 75.73 could turn things back up. The next support is seen at 56 and 45. A lower high top could also be in place in AGN. AGN has been a solid performer recently. A close over the August 31st high of 82.50 could be very positive for the bulls. However, if the lower high top remains in place and the bears stay in control, AGN could decline to 68 or lower. Ben is another stock that could have a lower high top. The bulls need a close over the August 31st high of 121.35 to void the bearish setup. If Ben remains bearish, the next support is seen at 195. The key hurdle for the bears is last year's low of 84. BIIB, BIB, could also have a lower high top. If the bearish setup holds, there's plenty of room for a decline and the risk is relatively low. A close over the September 1st high of 95.47 would void the setup. If the bears stay in control, BIB could decline to 75 or lower. ICE, or ICE, is a lot like BIB or BIIB. There's plenty of room for a decline and the risk is relatively low. A close over the August 31st high of 118.43 would put the bearish outlook on hold. If the bears remain in control, the next support for BIB is near 95. If the bears get through there, the monthly chart is relatively wide open down towards 60. The last stock we're going to look at is VFC. VFC also has a possible lower high top. The bulls need to close over the August 31st high of 119.81 to avoid the setup. If the bears stay in control, VFC could ultimately decline toward 90. Well, that's the message for today. Thank you for your time and attention. Good luck and good trading.